Hi, welcome to my channel Cloud with Girish. In this video, I'm going to show you how to secure REST API using IAM authorization. I will use AWS API Gateway via AWS SAM to configure this security for the API endpoint. With microservice architecture dominating the integration technology, there are millions of APIs out there. Some APIs are used in private network by internal application, and some are offered in public platform. It is essential that these API endpoints are protected so that only authorized consumers can have access to these API. Let's look at our architecture design. The first diagram here is a diagram showing unsecure API. We have API gateway. We have an API endpoint that's invoking a Lambda function. Lambda function is getting the data from DynamoDB and returning it back to the client. It's an unsecure endpoint, so any consumer can invoke it. The second architecture design here is using IAM as a method to protect the API endpoint. So in the header, when invoking the API endpoint, a consumer will need to pass the IAM Auth configuration in order to access the data. I have completed a similar workshop before, but that was using the AWS console. In this workshop, I'm going to use AWS SAM. That's a serverless application model, the template to create the Lambda function and API endpoint using infrastructure as code approach. IAM Auth is one of the many ways that REST API endpoint can be secured to prevent unauth access to the API. Basic authentication using username and password, which is not recommended, JWT, OAuth 2, or few other mechanisms that can be implemented to secure the API endpoint depending on the use case. I will use AWS IAM Auth to secure the API endpoint in this workshop. Prereq for this is having a DynamoDB table, Lambda function, and IAM credential, which include the access key and the secret key for your account. Here is the DynamoDB table, very simple table with some task data. I have already created it. Also, there is a Lambda function. I will build and deploy this function using AWS SAM command. Let's get started. We're going to build the Lambda function using AWS SAM. We'll create a REST API get endpoint using AWS SAM. We'll validate the get point using Postman, and then we will secure the endpoint and validate it again using the Postman. Here is our Lambda function. As you can see, that's pretty standard Lambda function. It has a Lambda handler. And it also has a get all task function, which is getting all the task from the table and returning it back to the API. Here on the left, you will see a SAM template, and SAM template is defining the resources, which is our Lambda function, also the API endpoint with a path of all task and a method of get. So here is like detail around the SAM template for the Lambda function. We have a resource type of function. This is using a Python runtime 3.1.2, 15-second timeout. We have a default memory size of 128 MB. We have policy defined for the access, and then there is an event, which is the get method for the API. Another resource defined here is the task API, and this is named as task API. Its stage name is dev, and that's another resource in the SAM template. The command to build and deploy function and API are SAM build, SAM deploy, and then you can use SAM deploy again just to update the stack in case you make any changes in the function. Once I have built and deployed the API, I'm going to test the API using the Postman. And as you can see that it's an unsecure endpoint, so I'm getting my data back in the response. Let's make this endpoint secure so that only auth client can have access to this API. So let's look at our template again. And as you can see, I have added an auth parameter and a default authorizer of AWS IAM. And this is the line of code that will make this API endpoint secure. Let's test the API again. This time I'm getting a missing authentication token error, and that's because I have made this API endpoint secure using the AWS IAM authorizer. So until I pass the credential in the header, I will not be able to extract the data using this API endpoint. So let's now pass the auth parameter in the header when invoking the API, and this is my access key and secret key that I'm passing, and it will work this time. I'm getting my data back. For IAM Auth, in the header, access key and secret key was passed in this example. Once we are done with it, clean up the resources so we don't incur the cost. So delete the DynamoDB table, Lambda function, API, and the auth created for this workshop. With this workshop, a REST API has been created and endpoint has been secured using IAM Auth. Consumer will need to pass required IAM and access key and secret key in the header to invoke the API. There are other ways to secure API like the WTO Auth API key. We will explore these ways in another workshop. Hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. I'm working on some other interesting content on various AWS topics. These will be posted soon. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.